effectively changes. Those moments when you can effectively say everything after this moment is different than everything that came before. And it seems, at least in our national consciousness, we probably have one of those moments about once a generation. There's times when you look out over what happens after a particular event, everything is effectively different than what happened before. That would happen, say, at Pearl Harbor. The assassination of John Kennedy, the explosion of the Challenger, September 11th. And if you were alive for any of those moments, you could probably say with more accuracy what you were feeling on that day than you could tell me what you ate for breakfast this evening. Because they leave this impression in our lives, right? They're hinge moments. They're moments when everything changes in that moment. And even when we know effectively not everything changes, but how we look at things, everything changes and shifts and moves after this moment. And it's not just big national events. Those things are part of our national consciousness. But for each of us as individuals, we have those moments spread across our lives as well, don't we? Do you remember that Christmas that you got that burrito? Or that Christmas when you got that doll or that bike or that wagon or whatever it was that you really wanted? You can still remember that Christmas picture. That what it was like to have it. You might not remember any other things that you ever got in your life, but you remember that one, don't you? Or that time somebody said to you, you should do, and you can fill in the blank there. And when you think about it, what do you do? Or that moment you met that one person. That one person. You remember that one moment you met that one person. And hopefully it's that person who's sitting next to you right now. But you remember, you can remember those things because our lives hinge on them. Our lives hinge on them. And things that come after are dramatically different than the things that come before. It happens the same way in the stories in the Bible. And St. Mark believes there is one story, one moment when the cosmos shifts on the life of that story. And St. Mark is kind of telling this story. We're going along. We remember the people of Israel for 500-600 years, they had these things called prophets. And prophets would talk, and they were hoping for a better day. These prophets kept coming along, and they kept saying, we're hoping that God does something new. We hope that God does something new soon. We hope that God does something, and everything will change. It'll be just like the old days. Everything will change. It'll be like the old days. It'll be like when David was king. You remember when David was king? Boy, it'll be just like that. And everything will be good, and people will behave themselves, and the world will be right. And they kept hoping, there was this day, there was this day, there was this day, there was this day, there was this day that will come. And when that day comes, everything will be right with the world. And then John remembered there was one man. It was this John character. And he was the last one. And we know he was the last one because of what happened after him. John, this last of this moment, he's there, he's preaching, he's down in the river, he's baptizing people. And this one man, Jesus of Nazareth, comes down to the river, gets in the water. And this is the hinge moment. This is really the moment. This is the moment for all of Mark's gospel, this hinge moment. When Jesus comes up out of the water, the heavens are ripped open. That's what it says. The heavens are torn open. And his cup comes down. And we know the heavens are torn open. And when the heavens are torn open, it never says anywhere else in the story that they're put back together. At this moment, this is the moment when everything shifts. Because heaven is torn open. And what happens when heaven is torn open is we can see into heaven. And the distance between heaven and earth is eliminated. It's brought close by this man, this Jesus, who is there in the water. The heaven is ripped open, and they see heaven. And heaven comes down, and it is in this intersection moment between Jesus and all of these people, and heaven and earth. Everything shifts. this moment had shifted. And that's what you see. What does it look like then when heaven is torn open? Well, it looks like you can see in heaven. Right? That's the image. That's what you're supposed to understand. You don't need a 3-year-old boy writing a book to be able to understand about going to heaven. Because this is what's happening. Jesus is there. And Jesus is illustrating to everybody who kind of missed the moment or doesn't know to look up, and they're all looking down. He illustrates what this looks like. So what does it look like when heaven is ripped open and the distance between God and humanity is changed? Well, it looks like people getting fed. And it looks like people who are sick finding healing. And it looks like people who are alone finding companionship. And it looks like people speaking of peace. And it looks like people speaking of renewal of lives, of human beings. And it looks like all of these things that Jesus starts to do. Because all of these things that Jesus is doing is he's showing what it means to live in a world that there is no separation between heaven and earth. And he starts doing that. And he does all these things. Because that was the hinge moment, you see. Because that movement. And he's arguing with the devil. And all of that sounds different. Because now there is this opening between heaven and earth. It wasn't there before. This is what everybody was hoping for. And in all of the story, it was amazing all this story. So everybody keeps walking with their head down. You keep walking along, head down. And we don't look up, because if you look up, all of a sudden you see all this explosion. This new stuff. See the life of Jesus. And then, but there was one thing that we remember. One thing we remember from that man in John. Go back just one thing we remember from him. There was this promise that this one who was to come, this Jesus, he would touch our hearts with fire. That this Jesus would touch our lives with fire. And he would open our eyes. And if our eyes are open, we would begin to see the same things that he saw. And if our eyes are open, we would see that this separation between heaven and earth doesn't exist any longer. If our eyes were open, we're going to begin to see that the distance between God's reality and our lives is becoming ever smaller all the time. If our eyes are open, this hinge moment between what used to be and what really is in God's imagination all of a sudden starts to pivot in that moment. Because he would touch with the fire of God. I don't know if any of you read involved in the USA Today. And I don't think read USA Today when you go to the hotel. But if you read the USA Today, this past week, there was an article by a lady, Kathy Grossman. And Kathy Grossman writes about religion. And usually she writes about religion fairly well. I mean, it's not about just culture wars or about just, that mainline people are dying or evangelical people are rising or any of that kind of stuff. It usually has a more open feeling about that. But in this article that she wrote this past week, and I think it was Wednesday's newspaper, she had just almost a disheartening story in that it said that now people seem to be willing to say what they really think. And what people really think is that nearly 40+% of our neighbors don't believe in anything. It's not that they believe in God, but don't come to church. 40% of people now register that they don't believe in anything. That means most of the people who live around us don't believe in anything. Nothing. There is nothing there. We live, we die, and our lives lost. And the next generation comes. And there's a lot of things you can say about that. And there's a lot of things, and part of the article was about the life of institutional church. What does that mean for the life of institutional church? Well, really, that's of little consequence in the greater scheme of things. But certainly, the fact that 40+% of our neighbors believe in absolutely nothing certainly reflects poorly on institutional churches across the board. But I also offer to you that it reflects poorly on our individual lives. Because at the end of the day, right? Yeah, I mean, people know St. Mark is here, or St. Swithian in the swamp is there, or any of these places. But what do people really see? What do people really see? They see us. They don't see St. Mark. They don't see St. John. They don't see Grace. They don't see Water's Edge even. They see us in the world. And when 40+% of the people in our neighborhoods don't believe in anything, it kind of suggests that maybe they don't see anything in us. They don't see anything, any fire, any rending open of heaven in our lives. But that's a really weird thing, because as we gather here together in a place like this, we see all the things that you people do all over the place. All the people you fed, all of the people that you extend care and compassion for, all of the people that you help find healing, all of the people that you help find comfort in this world, all of the people that you find and you welcome into units. You see? The difference between, it's not just about our institutions, but it is about how we become pivot moments in the lives of the people around us. That somehow, do we allow God to open heaven in our presence, not just in this place, but in the world in which we occupy, in the place where so many people actually see our lives. And there's where the difference happens. That something happens in our lives that opens us up in a way to the world around us, that the world can't help but see God, and can't help but see what Jesus is up to in the world around us. God invites people like us, not just significant people, but ordinary people, to become pivot points in the world in which we find ourselves. In all of those places, all those schools, and those homes, and those jobs, and those neighborhoods where we find ourselves. And where we find 40+% of our neighbors who think there is nothing to believe in. There was a moment when God tore heaven open. And as you follow the rest of the story after that moment, it never says that God closed it back up. And so Jesus comes, and Jesus lives, Jesus dies, and Jesus is resurrected, and then he leaves us. He leaves us as those people who are the ones which the whole story is pivoting around. The whole people who, and somehow God makes himself known in all of this. As you leave this place, ask yourself if you want to be that person